I welcome you, dear friends, respected guests, and subscribers of my channel. Thank you all so much for following the new episodes, live streams, and of course, everything that's happening. It's just incredible. So right now, while we're live, I'm here with Denis Eliseevich. He's on the line. Denis, welcome.
Hello, Alexander.
Well, Zelensky is talking to Trump, and not just him. There's a whole European team on a group call. It's really surprising, though, why they need to rush somewhere just to have a phone or conference call. To Munich, well, to Berlin, yes, to Metz. That's where the big question comes up. There will also be a coalition of interested parties gathering. In general, we're following all the events and inviting everyone to discuss what's happening. The rules of our stream are very simple. First, subscribe to Denis Eliseevich, like this video, of course, wherever you're watching it, live or not. And of course, the QR code you see on the screen next to me, the opportunity to ask a question, as they say, out of turn at the very beginning of our session, the Q&A session. There's also the Shelest Viewers Club on Telegram, a closed viewers club, and the YouTube community, where you can leave questions in advance. We'll definitely chat with you as well. And we'll actually start with that, yes, this interaction with the chat. So after the war in Ukraine, that's the poll for today's broadcast. And the options are worse than during the war, better than during the war, worse than before the war, or better than before the war. These are, simple, a bit punny, but interesting options. Let's skip over today's discussion about Alaska, Zelensky, the authorities, the elections, and let's start with this. What do you think? Will things be worse or better after the war in Ukraine, and compared to when?
That's the kind of question that no one can even roughly answer right now, because we don't know how the war will end. I can only give some scenarios. If the war ends with the current ideology, this unhealthy nationalism and the push to make all of Ukraine like Lviv will only worsen things. If a different path, like the one I propose, is chosen, Ukraine could truly become one of Europe's best countries.
Interesting. So, friends, please vote, and at the end we'll sum up the results and get an idea of what Ukraine will be like if the war ends. I'm interested in your opinion, and let's start analyzing Zelensky's travels today. So he's going to Germany, and at the same time there are two very interesting publications. One of them is Politico, where Ukraine's demands are listed. The point is that nothing and no one is being given up, no territories at all, and basically from 500 billion to 1 trillion in compensation, like reparations for reconstruction. Yes. Well, and there are also points about guarantees that sanctions will remain in place until the guarantees are fulfilled and so on. And at the same time, roughly at the same moment, while Zelensky was getting off the plane in Germany, Sky News appears, where the Europeans supposedly whispered among themselves and said, let's have a 15-day ceasefire right now. And after 15 days, if it lasts longer, we'll start lifting sanctions from Russia. These are two completely different messages. Personally, I suspected the Europeans of some kind of separate collusion and playing along, maybe even with Trump himself before Alaska behind Zelensky's back. Don't you think so?
Yes, that's exactly how it is. You could even say it's a double game. On one hand, they want to show that they still support Ukraine, and Zelensky isn't losing support. He flew to Merz today, and as always, Merz patted him on the shoulder with a kind of sympathy and support. But in reality, if you saw yesterday, there was a report that Britain, Starmer, contacted Macron, Merz, and others with a request not to put on these public shows, frankly speaking, so as not to anger Trump, not to spoil relations with Trump and the United States. Because, by the way, many people don't understand this. Negotiations are one thing, but another aspect is tariffs and various economic matters, which are very important. And if Europe loses America, or if relations become tense, it will be a big loss and a major problem. That's why I don't believe in any kind of strong support right now. There may be nice words, and surely there will be like, we're with you till the end, come on guys, everything's right. But in reality, much has already been decided. And what you mentioned at the beginning about Politico, the 5 demands they wrote about, well, that's again part of Zelensky's election campaign. Like, I'm demanding this because I want to run in the elections. But then I have a question. You know my views, so what is the compromise from our side? If everything he says is non-negotiable, then where is the compromise?
Well, Stefanchuk clearly said that there will be no compromises, the war will end on Ukraine's terms. Well, that was yesterday.
They're out of their minds. How can the losing side set the terms? I dislike that Russia is doing it, but the fact is they're winning. Tension at the front is intense, and that's obvious to everyone. There's a political crisis in Ukraine, and Trump is meeting Putin before Zelensky. For 2 years, he insisted nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, but the opposite happened. Denying this is pointless. We must focus on real solutions, not outdated, rotten political fantasies from the 90s. They don't work anymore.
There's an opinion that Zelensky will, at the cost of turning Ukraine to ashes, just ashes, the country, the state, everything, try to put obstacles in Trump's way to please his globalist friends, partners, and masters. Well, that's just my take. You decide for yourself. And this trend has already kind of taken shape. In what sense? In the sense that, of course, Zelensky didn't like it, that he was turned away from Alaska. After all, there were plans, there were rumors that maybe somewhere in a hallway nearby, like Yermak and Rubio, remember? They crossed paths.
Yes, maybe he would show up somewhere there. Maybe he would be sitting in the state of Alaska, somewhere nearby, so that when Putin talks to Trump, he would be there, and it would look respectful. But Trump turned him away and did it in his own style.
Basically, Trump changed his mind. He's been really irritated with Zelensky lately, although before that there seemed to be some kind of neutrality after the Oval Office meeting. How do you see it? Is Zelensky capable of doing anything in this situation, or does a little actually depend on him?
Of course, let's realistically look at how Zelensky could throw a wrench in Trump's plans. Ukraine isn't an economy that's deeply integrated into global economic processes. That's out of the question because in today's world, the economy always comes first. So that's not an option. What else can Ukraine do? It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face or paying for a ticket just to annoy the conductor, something like that. We can't do anything. Zelensky's wrong behavior could lead to a complete halt in aid and a cutoff of intelligence sharing. And then everything will fall apart in just a matter of weeks. Literally in just a few weeks. Do you remember how it was at the beginning? Actually, let me tell you this. Even last week, Trump's team already knew that Zelensky wouldn't be in Alaska, firmly and decisively. But a few reports from Columbia Broadcasting System or some other globalist American media were saying something like, the question of Zelensky's presence in Alaska is being considered, referring to a high-ranking White House official. This is pure fake news. You know, it's like someone said Zelensky should be there, and then they write a news story. Zelensky is being considered. No one was considering anyone. It was all clear from the very beginning. If the meeting between Trump and Putin goes well, the next meeting will be in Russia, and then people will scream even more. I don't really like it, but if there were another president, this wouldn't be happening. Actually, it's not that I don't really like it. I really don't like what's going on. I'm not trading territories, but let someone tell me a way out of this situation. Let someone make another proposal. Zelensky is stomping his feet. And the Europeans, although only on camera publicly for the press, are doing the same. That's how it is. That's how it is. Why didn't you all come together during Biden's presidency or a year ago to demand urgent peace talks or solutions? Where were your proposals then? You insisted on fighting to the end, no retreat. Now suddenly you're making demands and acting concerned. Where was this before? Only after President Trump did things start to change. And even that's not enough for you. Give me a better option and I'll support it first.
What is this territory exchange and what's its current status? People have been talking about it for years.
Everything that's in the press, you know, I can tell you what I know. So what I know is that if everything goes well and everyone behaves properly, Putin might withdraw the Russian army from Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv and Sumy regions.
Well, today there was already a denial from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, saying that from those regions that are in the constitution of the Russian Federation, no one is going to withdraw anything. Thus, kind of hinting that Sumy and Kharkiv regions remain, meaning there are no questions about them.
Well, you know, their army's presence there is insignificant, but Russia can't behave any differently. Did we really expect them to leave? Yes, you know, we're ready to leave Kherson. This is a game with high stakes right away, and to make them lower their demands, they will require some extraordinary offers from Trump. For example, the complete lifting of all sanctions and very quickly. Very close economic cooperation, which potentially involves very significant numbers, things like that. Next, Ukraine's neutrality. So it's a whole package, comprehensive, economics, geopolitics, and many, many other things. I'll tell you something else. I've supported federalizing Ukraine using the American model, like many successful European federations. Unfortunately, this idea is often linked to separatism, mainly due to some Ukraine figures with Russian ties. But from what I know, federalization of Ukraine has already been discussed by Trump's and Putin's teams and could be on the agenda.
Well, look, this is a rather controversial point. On the one hand, by the way, was it the Financial Times who wrote about this? I think it was Cable News Network. Well, what you're saying, that in principle they're ready to withdraw from Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. And basically, this is a rollback to the first Istanbul Agreement. In the first Istanbul Agreement, there was also Crimea and Luhansk, 62, and Donetsk regions. And that's basically it. However, a lot has changed and the realities on the ground have changed. And here, it's not a question of whether they're ready or not. They'll do whatever is necessary. The only question is the price and, of course, the agreements. In any case, Ukraine remains out of the game economically and politically because, I don't know, no one in the European Union is going to accept Ukraine. Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland were involved. A major ideological scandal occurred, even involving Karol Nawrocki.
Yes.
Nawrocki gave an interview and just completely destroyed this ideology with the red and black flag at the concert.
Yes.
Korsha. In short, Ukraine faces a major capitulation. The question is whether and how it can be avoided. What do you think?
First of all, I don't classify this as a capitulation. For me, this is not a capitulation at all. And I think I already said this on one of your broadcasts. People shouldn't reduce everything to a territorial exchange and think that's the problem. In reality, independence fell into Ukraine's lap without bloodshed in 1991. It was a wonderful event, really. We didn't take advantage of it, and it's not just about Zelensky. All the presidents led Ukraine to disaster. Honestly, we are an unsuccessful country. Now, a lot has changed, and there will clearly be a new defense system. Well, how should I put it? It's like a new order after World War II, and we shouldn't just accept it or see it as capitulation, but simply sit down and look at where life has brought us because of the way we've done things. Everything needs to change, and drastically. We either accept that, yes, we've had a disaster, but basically we can go on living and a lot needs to change, or it continues, even if we separate along the line of demarcation, continue the current policy, and it will cause another catastrophe. I say this daily. That's the issue. It's not about land. Agreements with people are possible, even if called exchanges. People tell me, I live in the territory some suggest giving to Putin. I reply, I'm not suggesting that, and I dislike it too. Show me alternatives. Here's one. If you want to live in independent Ukraine, the state provides housing funds. It can be done as it was with America's indigenous peoples. For example, zero taxes. Here they are allowed to have a casino license and many, many different things. And all of this is much cheaper and more realistic. And we need to make some surgical decisions, very unpleasant decisions. But for what? That's the question. To live as before, it's not worth it at all. It's just not worth the effort. Everything needs to be changed radically. We need to abandon this old ideology, this whole old system. And this is not just some kind of populism. These are facts.
Well, you understand that one of the points you mentioned, which appears in these plans, and here I also see in the comments, people come and say, how is that? We fought and fought, took it, and then gave it away. But if we are considering the topic of federalization, then, excuse me, but this is exactly what was started in the East in 2014 after Maidan Crimea left in a different way. There was a special operation to support the people, and the Tatars protested. Let's not get into that, but recall the National Security and Defense Council meeting where Tymoshenko and Turchinov spoke. Everyone agreed not to defend anything and to leave, raising the flag, so the situation was different. If Ukraine becomes a federation, it might not exist within a year or two. As for the Western federal districts, well, let's call them that, will be drawn to the west, Odessa. It's clear where it will be drawn, and the same goes for Kharkiv and let's say others as well, including even the border regions that have been battered by war because of economic ties. There will inevitably be a draw to Russia, which is very dangerous. Then who will govern Ukraine and what will happen to power in Kyiv? That's why my proposal is often called separatist. You just listed the classic set of dogmas and misconceptions that are very widespread in our country. And what do the opponents of this idea use? And by the way, one remark, stepping back. You said Crimea had the support of the people. There was no support from the people. There was a referendum held at gunpoint.
But I don't deny at all that most likely the majority of Crimeans wanted to live under Russia. I have to admit that, but I don't think it was an honest referendum. The real numbers, if we're talking about democracy, wouldn't have shown such a unanimous decision. Anyway, about federalization. When this came up somewhere in the press, what I just told you some patriotic channels, patriotic ones, started writing about yesterday. Look, what a terrible idea. What if there are federations? They will block our entry into the European Union, into NATO. Federations manage internal policy, while the central government handles foreign policy. That's the idea of a federal system. Like in America, states control local matters, not national decisions like joining organizations. In Ukraine, it's the opposite. I suggest this approach because it unites the country.
You forgot the post-war arrangements. Neutral status?
Yes.
It's a preset.
Yeah.
So basically, the people who will actually be upset are those who currently, let's say, support the war in Ukraine. Those who are for the war, right? We are against the war, but they will say, wait a minute, we don't decide anything. So the default setting is neutral status, demilitarization, only our own weapons, restrictions, a possible limit on the size of the army, and cultural policy, including economic policy, will still prevail in those federal, let's say, enclaves in those parts of federal Ukraine, and will just end up with what probably the Kremlin wanted in the first place. Well, all right.
Look, what I'm saying now, and I've always said, is that neutrality is the right thing to do right now. I'm just telling you what people were writing in those public forums, meaning people don't accept neutrality. But there are questions about the European Union. For example, I'm against joining the European Union because of today's bureaucratic and ideological issues. 20 years ago, everything was fine there. You say that economic ties, the break, that's all not true. What can the Western regions do? Will they decide that Bandera is a hero, that they want Ukrainian to be the only language? Fine, let them do that in Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk. In some regions like Ternopil, that's fine with me. But in Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, or places like Poltava and Kherson, it's different. That's my point. How does this disrupt economic ties? Is the economy now really as simple as moving something across the road? Is that how things work globally?
Yes, in Ukraine, the economy is currently like this, with damaged businesses. They make money there, in illegal ways. Call centers and, basically semi-fraudulent schemes. And by digging something out of the ground or growing something on the land, loading it onto freight trains and either not paying taxes or paying the bare minimum. So they send it abroad and over there they manufacture it. Well, I was shocked when I found out that all of Italy, all the nearby factories and even the Middle East make furniture from Ukrainian wood. Yeah, I was honestly stunned because they cut it down, loaded it up, and sent it off. That's the kind of economy it is, and that's why they'll do the same thing in Russia 100%. If we dig a moat with crocodiles, we'll lose the city of Kharkiv. Today, some footage came in, you might have seen it before the broadcast, showing what the center of Kharkiv looks like. Well, obviously everything is damaged, it's a war zone, but what Kharkiv used to be, what it lived for, how it flourished, and now it will be a city at a dead end, that's all.
Sash, why will Kharkiv be a city at a dead end? Look, we can't look at neutrality and federalization through the lens of Zelensky's current life, and the present situation. Or, for example, I'm not offering my reform package to Zelensky and the current situation. If we're talking about federalization and neutrality, that means a complete overhaul of the constitution, adopting an entirely new constitution from scratch, not just making amendments. And that's a different life, that's a different tax system. This country could live differently. The economy is digital today, and if someone is going to trade with Russia, some enterprise, let's say, the conditions with Russia won't be friendly, but there will be some trade. So how can that be done? Or as you said, in the Middle East, they make furniture from Ukrainian components. How will this move the region somewhere? And what kind of separatist sentiments are we talking about? I live in Sumy. I made a product, I shipped it, I got paid. Why should that make me a separatist? Or make me want to go to Russia? I live in Ukraine. Besides, it's not just about a federal system. I know this because issues of autonomy are being considered. In particular, Donbas could become an autonomy. Or, well, if we're discussing compromises, the territories Putin seized in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson could become autonomous. There are many possible solutions. And I see this as bringing things together, I repeat, not the opposite, not tearing things apart. Right now, we see a unitary state, a republic, that in 30 years has been torn apart, had a lot annexed, and has been divided internally. So unity in diversity will bring things together, and many countries have gone through this.
So we're live on air, friends. It's 17:23 right now. Footage is coming in. And at this moment, something has started, so there will probably be some news. We've already spoken with Trump, not for very long though. As I understand it, if everyone there at least had to say hello, and there are a lot of participants on the phone. Anyway, Zelensky and Merz came out to the briefing rather slowly, kind of strolling, and Zelensky looked like he had no expression on his face. Well, maybe it just seemed that way, maybe he's tired. After all, he does like to appear tired. So now the reports will start coming in, they'll say something, and the journalists will ask some questions. It's all done. Trump has spoken with the Europeans, and with Zelensky, the main question arises. Before this call, many people were saying, look, they'll try to convince Trump how Putin is deceiving him, how he'll outsmart him, that he can't be trusted, that there will be all sorts of instructions, that they'll try to give him their advice. Now, just at this moment, Reuters is publishing that Trump, as he told the Europeans, sees the main goal in Alaska as achieving and announcing a ceasefire. Specifically in Alaska. Macron said this after the meeting. He was on the phone, so we're already getting some definite hints. Will this call affect the meeting between Trump and Putin? Because I've come across the opinion that many people think everything has already been decided, and this is just for the Europeans to play along, to go through the motions.
It won't affect it at all. Not everything has been decided. The world's framework, the skeleton exists, but many details will be resolved in discussions. Also, as you know, there will be a one-on-one meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska. And that's always very serious. So it won't affect it at all. This is all for the press, for diplomacy, it's diplomatic. Like, guys, look, yes, I'm taking your interests into account. I'll tell you this, Trump doesn't really respect everyone who was there. He has a more or less decent attitude toward Merz, but as for everyone else who was there, he doesn't think much of them. Everyone knows this. And the situation is dangerous for Europeans. As for Zelensky, it's just for the press and not worth considering.
Well, I mean, we can't assume, or again, I still think that Trump said some very accurate percentages the day before yesterday. 88% of Ukrainians want the war to end. I agree with these numbers. Trump, of course, he's not really good with numbers. He can talk about orders of magnitude, tens, hundreds, switch and mix them up. But in this particular case, I think that about 88% really do want everything to stop as soon as possible, and then things could be sorted out, but without war, without tragedy, without casualties. So we shouldn't expect a ceasefire from Alaska, do you think?
No, it's quite possible to expect a ceasefire. And about the numbers, back in May, actually what's happening now should have happened in May. I'll tell the viewers that yes, and then Trump's team changed their plans, and in May, at the beginning of June, I did a series of broadcasts where I said that in August there would be a collapse of trust in Zelensky and a lot would change. In fact, we've now reached even faster than expected what was planned, and people were asking, well, how will we actually know that this collapse of trust has happened? So there's a certain company in America, number one, called Gallup, which does sociology, the most reputable here, and it's used by Trump's team. And here are the numbers that were publicly, let's say, shown, that 70% of Ukrainians are in favor of stopping the war, practically at any cost. This means that there has been a collapse of trust in the authorities. The pain threshold of the war has been reached. People sincerely don't understand what's next. Why? Because in fact, no one has actually stated the goal of the war. Furthermore, this same Gallup published that there has been a dramatic shift. In short, only 12 or 16% support the American authorities in Ukraine. That means 80% do not support them. And that's a disgrace. I consider it a disgrace, a catastrophe. It shows that most people live with the attitude that everyone owes them. And that's what's frightening.
The first statement, so Merz comes out at the briefing and says that Ukraine is ready to discuss territorial issues. Now we need to play a drum roll. That's it. That's what Merz said with his own mouth. But the front line should kind of be the starting point. Well, okay, so look, when Lavrov, who, by the way, will also be in Alaska today, they reported, together with Putin.
Yes.
And not only Lavrov, many others said, guys, the reality's on the ground. The reality's on the ground. Now we hear from Merz, just a different wording for the realities on the ground. Basically, the front line is the starting point. Well, and Zelensky, of course, is acting as usual, saying that his position on the withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from Donetsk region hasn't changed. So basically, no one is going anywhere. And Trump, during a phone call, says that Zelensky is ready to provide Ukraine with security guarantees. Can you imagine?
That's basically how it was. Trump just told them, what kind of compromise do you mean if there won't be a territorial compromise? He said, just forget about your fantasies. That's how it's going to be. Zelensky makes this statement for the domestic audience, like you said, so that there won't be bad morale at the front, although it's already there. Previously, motivation was lacking, but now it's present, which is why this is happening. He clearly stated earlier, publicly, that there will be a territorial exchange. Sash, everything's been said. He spoke at the White House, noting Zelensky spent 3.5 years attending meetings, but where are the results? Why does he need to be in Alaska? It was stated clearly. Did you see Zelensky's message yesterday? He said Erdogan is ready to host a summit with Europe, the European Union, Russia, Zelensky, Putin, everyone. Another summit means more empty talk. It's time for real action, which Trump's team will deliver.
If we take into account what's happening now, well, it's all public for the people, for the press. It's all just decorations. That's all it is. Here they turn on the smoke machine. Here confetti flies onto the stage and girls run out like in the Kvartal 95 show dancing ballet. Teams jump out and everyone sings together where the shop windows shine. If we try to get past all this tinsel and at least try to get to the essence, it seems that the authorities on Bankova know everything. They're aware. What do the latest moves from Bankova tell us? Yesterday's youth forum where Zelensky and Yermak spoke, Yermak says, a stipend of 8,000, let's open up travel abroad until the age of 22, like, please go ahead, travel. Young people, no one will bother you. So we see a set of absolutely populist and, well, public relations moves. When Yermak comes out and says, guys, we have martial law, that's true, but we could have implemented it in every sphere of life. But we have a democratic president. That's why we don't impose martial law everywhere. And the youth listen, wide-eyed and open-mouthed. And it seems like the pre-election campaign has started. Well, when Maliuk sits there and says, we're on the side of light, we're the good ones, the elves and the evil orcs are against us. Well, everyone can just imagine what Maliuk looks like, right? The symbol of light. And he says that Bletsky is holding a lion's share of the front. And at that moment, probably everyone watching the telethon who has relatives, loved ones, acquaintances, or friends at the front, not with Beletsky but in regular brigades, probably sighed in relief and threw up their hands. So there's clearly some preparation for certain political decisions going on. Are the elections coming up or something?
That's one of the options, but actually no elections were planned for this year. Oh, I even wrote a post about it. Zelensky's only option is to announce fall elections. You're right, yesterday was full of pre-election statements, but not all students, even Soros-type ones, believed them. Milovanov from the Kiev School of Economics was there, and Yermak's off-the-record remarks were published by Ukrainska Pravda anyway. So if anyone comes on my behalf, send them away. As you said, we supposedly have democracy here. A democratic president, we could have acted against you, but we barely did anything wrong. That's the kind of people they are. Yermak acts like everyone else is an idiot and only he is smart, and he tries to sell that. Their behavior is broken. They're falling apart and just trying to save themselves. Now, as we see they're preparing for elections, maybe in spring 2026. Who said they'd have any ratings left by the elections? A few statements like the Americans with compromising material and ratings won't even matter. And whether someone ends up in prison and the issue of sanctions. For instance, I can hint that some Ukrainian officials may be the first Ukrainians added to the United States Magnitsky Act sanctions list. Previously, only Russians were on it, but since 2016 it includes others. Recently, a Brazilian judge was added. The list targets those who seriously restrict people's rights and freedoms, which is happening in Ukraine now. So, there are a lot of surprises ahead. I don't know who these statements are aimed at. I mean, who's going to believe this? Well, maybe 10 or 15%.
Well, you know, there's already a precedent, the Hungarian precedent. Orban, of course, has been extremely outspoken lately. Yes, he makes statements and immediately gets attacked by the globalist media. It really reminds me of Yanukovych's Mezhihiria, or when Navalny filmed Putin's palace, remember? They found that construction site.
Yes.
With Orban, well, basically it's classic. So you don't even need to stay in the political discourse for too long. It's all classic. So yeah, they're building, the builders have their phones taken away by Orban so they don't film those zebras running like Yanukovych's ostriches, zebras with Orban, classic. But Hungary did impose sanctions on certain high-ranking TCC officials who were involved, well, in the killing of a person.
Yes.
A citizen, and well, we were somehow told about sanctions. Well, Hungary, little Hungary, like what do they have their accounts? Nothing at all. But it works as a precedent. On the other hand, well, these rumors have been going around for a long time that the Americans will impose sanctions against someone. They haven't imposed them on anyone, and it doesn't even seem like that's going to happen.
I checked the Magnitsky list, and you couldn't have seen this information anywhere. Why aren't they imposing them? I can tell you that too. Honestly, I don't know how they're holding back, but I know for sure that they are. Because if they start imposing them now or do something similar, it will just give Putin an advantage. And in a way, Trump will publicly show as if he's on Putin's side. Now, any loyal statement by Trump towards Putin is already being seen as, oh, Agent Krasnov, look pro-Russian. That's what they're avoiding. But if Zelensky really continues to publicly fight, then believe me, this will happen already this fall.
A more complete quote from Zelensky, which is being given right now at the briefing. Well, there will also be answers to questions with Merz. Merz says, legal recognition of territories occupied by Russia. It's not up for discussion. Why is Merz talking about this? Only Merz himself knows what he has to do with legal, let alone any kind of recognition of Ukrainian territories. Well, that's the kind of sovereignty and independence we have, but that's not the point. Zelensky. So, we need to support the trilateral format. In short, the same old story. I won't retell it for long. The same old story. That is the trilateral format. First, a ceasefire. So, I told Trump that Putin is bluffing and there must be security guarantees. Trump says, okay, I support that. It feels like Trump attended a reception or, called up the Kana Chikova dacha. Like, yeah, some kind of madhouse. And played the role of some psychiatrist. Like, yes, okay, they'll treat you, they'll treat me, everything will be fine. In the meantime, at least I'm watching the broadcast right now in parallel. Well, we're live, and it's just the same words, the same thing, nothing new. So why was all this necessary? Why can't Trump just send them away?
He avoids sanctioning Zelensky and his team for the same reason. Doing so now would broadcast it globally and signal that he sides with Putin, making it seem like Russia versus Zelensky rather than Putin versus Zelensky. Sadly, for these two peoples, Zelensky is seen as Ukraine and Putin as Russia, which I completely reject. That's the only reason. As for why Zelensky repeats himself, I'll explain. Yermak's media strategy is to instruct his team to say everything is good, even when things are bad. In any unclear situation, smile and say that you are the best reformers. Everything is great here, and Zelensky apparently, maybe they pumped him up with this, or maybe he was a supporter of this approach from the start, and he always says the same thing, basically repeating himself. Stand your ground, make a statement for the domestic audience so people say, wow, what a strong Zelensky we have. He stands firm, even in this situation. That's what that call with Trump was for, just to check a box.
If we try to predict how the authorities will behave toward Ukrainians in the future, will they tighten the screws even more? For example, today, Uzhhorod was a bit shocked. Entry and exit, and there are about 10 or 15 checkpoints throughout the city. Basically, Uzhhorod came to a standstill because everyone is being stopped and harassed over these military registration documents. Plus, today there were a number of raids on people who, for $20,000 to $25,000, or even up to $150,000 in the country, were getting these military registration offices to issue certificates or find some excuse not to go to the army. So, as I understand it, every single screw is going to be tightened as much as possible in parallel.
It depends on the outcome. Much will become clear between August 16 and 20. Still, after the negotiations, what public statements will Trump make? He could seriously hurt Zelensky and his strategy. And then tightening the screws would be pointless. On the contrary, you'd need to show how much of a Democrat you are, as you said, and prepare for the elections. That could be the scenario. But if those who are, let's say, above Zelensky, on the other side, the same globalists decide to fight, then there will definitely be a tightening of mobilization. Other forms of intimidation will emerge, along with more censorship, crackdowns on dissent, and repressions. But if he's preparing for elections, he must distance himself from these actions, because continuing, especially with sanctions against his own citizens, would ruin him before the elections. They simply won't allow it.
In general, of course, there's another point that I think doesn't really concern the essence, but it's also part of the atmosphere. Zelensky looks really bad at this briefing that's happening right now, just really bad. It feels like...
Physically, you mean?
Yes, exactly. It feels like when you look at him, he looks like a person who feels nauseous. That's it. His face looks like that, or something is going on inside, like some kind of illness. Maybe his wife, Olena Zelenska, is right when she says his back hurts or something else hurts. In general, something hurts for Zelensky. We're used to discussing, well, old people, right? Old people. Like, for example, Trump is old, or Biden, he's all over the place. Look, he has a burst vein on his hand. Look, he makes statements that don't make sense, this and that, one thing after another. He's a crazy old man. And then there was Biden, a quiet old man. And this one is wild, but they're basically the same age, right? Well, we know how Gordon was burying Putin and how many Putins there are, but no one discusses Zelensky and his condition. Why?
Just to clarify, I never said Trump is old. I'm aware of his abilities. Many in their 30s would envy his mental and physical stamina. Why isn't Zelensky discussed? Sasha, if you raise that topic in Ukraine now, you'll face trouble within 15 minutes. That's why people who live outside Ukraine sometimes talk about it. You probably know, maybe it's even come up on your broadcasts, about the white background, the white wall appearing more and more often. I've heard that too. There are different rumors, but I'll say something else. Look at him. Look at his photo when he became president in 2019 or even in 2022 before the war started. And look at him now. He really looks like an old man, and I have a question. Well, that's just my view on life, but why? Did you really work yourself to the bone? Did you destroy yourself for the sake of some great reforms? Did you reform the state? Did you write some new page in history? You destroyed everything. You finished off even what was still alive. You introduced the worst practices, and history will remember him exactly like that. No matter how many textbooks they print now where Zelensky is a hero, none of it will turn out the way they planned. Believe me, everything will be completely different. I'm telling you again, these processes will already start in the fall. The collapse of trust has happened.
Let's sum up and move on, because the Russian perspective on this upcoming meeting is also very interesting. We'll talk about it in a moment, and it's interesting to talk to you as an entrepreneur, as someone who is also immersed in the economy. So, to summarize, Macron comes out and says Trump wants to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine in Alaska. That's what he says about Trump. Macron says that territorial issues should only be resolved through negotiations with Ukraine. That's the statement Macron makes. Merz says, well, as I already quoted, that Ukraine's and Europe's interests must be taken into account. So they're ready to discuss the issue of territories, but not legal recognition. First, a ceasefire, and then a framework agreement later. And this Sky News, which I started our conversation with today, also says something like 15 days, and then we'll gradually start lifting sanctions if everything goes well. And Zelensky, we won't give up Donbass, basically guarantees a trilateral meeting. So for now, we're taking these three statements, and then, of course, there will be more leaks and insider information, publications. All of this will happen this evening, literally right after our live broadcast. It's about to start. But while we have this, I'd like to summarize in the following way. So it turns out that, well, the globalists, Zelensky, and the Europeans want, let's have a ceasefire first. Basically, they're giving Trump the task, first make a ceasefire, and then we'll discuss the territories, this and that. So what do I think based on these three? Share your impressions. This is happening live right now. It looks like Trump really put the pressure on them. Well, pretty tough, because they're spinning around, saying the same things off topic. We didn't hear anything new from them, basically. They're trying this way and that and every which way. Like, let's do this, let's do that, let's try something else. That's the conclusion so far based on the information we have live. They didn't manage to disrupt the Trump and Putin summit in Alaska. So that's the main takeaway from today's conversation.
That couldn't have happened. Last week, Pashinyan, Aliyev, and Trump signed a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And after that, Trump's team made a decision. Enough messing around. It's time to bring this last matter, the peace between Ukraine and Russia, to a conclusion. And we can't see it. It was probably a video call between Trump and all those guys. We don't see how it went, but I'm sure it was very tough, and Trump knows how to be very tough, and it was a complete shakeup. Look, you're quoting Macron. I don't have access to all that right now. It's a live broadcast. He's just supporting Zelensky, and as you said, it's being repeated for the 5th time already, so that's it. It's a failure. As for the ceasefire, well, that could be a compromise from Putin's side to show that, yes, I'm finally ready, and maybe Trump will pressure him into it. But fundamentally, it's something completely different. Fundamentally. And by the way, you mentioned the recognition of territories, but no one discussed that. The focus was on freezing the issue for 49 years, but if I were Zelensky, I'd talk about federalization and keeping these regions within Ukraine as autonomies or federations. I'd think that way. Why freeze it? Why leave an open wound? It's crucial to resolve it now and move on. If you only patch it up, it'll burst open again eventually. That's how it is.
Well, it's very interesting. Yes, Zelensky says that's it. No one is withdrawing anywhere. And Trump, I wonder what he said to that, but we'll see that later. It will definitely appear in the Western press.
Yes.
So I can't avoid and not mention the situation on the front line at the front. So I mentioned that they're putting Zelensky forward, making him stand out. Look, he's holding almost the entire front line there. Now, we're even getting information that in the Dobropilya area, where there was a breakthrough, they sent in some Azov fighters and some prisoners for Russians. They're showing them, and in general, it seems like they're succeeding in cutting off that salient. And like, look how brave, tough, and powerful they are. Plus, on top of that, there's this ongoing social experiment. I'm not calling this social advertising. This and my someone is in Azov. I mean, we clearly see a certain agenda here. So,
yes.
Can you say that, well, if not a successor, well, actually, why not? Could Zelensky be a successor to Yermak in the political technology game?
I've never discussed this before, but I know Zelensky began working more politically with the president's office this year. By the way, regarding your question that you read at the beginning of the stream, if you imagine a scenario where such people are seriously involved in politics, I don't see myself living in that country, and I think many others, including those in Ukraine, feel the same. It's pointless, like it's destructive, it's aggression. If there are achievements, they should be recognized, and people who have accomplished them, well, according to the American model, I believe that's how the military should be treated. But dragging them into politics like this would just be a disaster. What Ukraine needs now is creation, moving away from militarism, moving away from the militarization of society, and focusing on gross domestic product, on happiness, on the future, on prosperity. And if we keep dragging this out, there will simply be a new war. I'll tell you straight, there will be a new war.
Well, Zelensky also talked about a new war.
Yes, by the way, I nearly fell out of my chair yesterday. He said, we will start a third war, and I wasn't sure what he meant. Maybe a world war? Anyway, Trump doesn't like that.
I'm just saying that there's a very real possibility that Zelensky might make a move on Transnistria.
I've seen similar things on some Telegram channels. Want me to tell you how it'll end? It ends with the physical elimination of those at the top who started. That's all. That won't work with Trump. It could happen with Biden, but even then, it's unlikely. The stakes are too high, and with Trump, it won't happen. It won't just be about sanctions anymore.
On the ground, as we've already discussed, it's clear that apparently they'll be drafting even more people into the army, sending even more of them forward and to their deaths. Many people are talking about this ideologically, and actions are being taken, so, Tetsaka are going wild, like it's their last day, cracking down on everyone who buys fake certificates or tries to get some kind of exemption. This means they'll be throwing in more live bodies. Accordingly, the war will continue. Will Trump's outcome happen if, well, hypothetically we assume it now? Well, globally, economically, everyone clearly sees that the globalists are defeated. They're losing. A new world order is coming with economic centers, yes, and peripheries. What I mean is, with big economies, strong ones, or, well, other countries and their zones of interest, there are certain entry points where, let's say, one economy flows into another, like corridors. So this kind of globalization will not be complete without a hegemon. And Ukraine, no matter how you look at it, is now either going this way or that way, either towards Europe or towards Russia. There are many people who, not even from a cultural or civilizational perspective, but purely from an economic point of view, say that part of Ukraine could clearly fall into the zone of interest of the Russian Federation, and Trump doesn't care. He needs to make a deal with Moscow, develop the Arctic, extract hydrocarbons, and supply them to Europe. To deprive Europe of resources as well, and he really doesn't care. What do you think about all this, and do you really think Trump will be able to walk away if, after reaching agreements with Putin, the globalists and Zelensky refuse to back down and continue the war in their own way?
Well, it's very unlikely that he would walk away from the negotiations or the process, especially after the agreement was reached between Aliyev and Pashinyan. Such a scenario has become very unlikely because, in a certain sense, it would show, well, not exactly, it would show weakness, unfinished business. I don't believe in the option of a complete withdrawal. To teach another lesson, yes, like I said about cutting off intelligence data and assistance, that's possible. But you mentioned either the European Union or Russia. I don't see any possibility for Artem Dmitruk's dream of some kind of integration of Ukraine into Russia or Belarus to become a reality. That's simply impossible. Once again, I urge you not to look at the economy through such an outdated perspective, that it absolutely has to integrate with someone. If you create a good product and the country allows it, sell it to everyone. Why should you have to align with someone that's such a primitive approach or produce outdated products like before and show high trade turnover with Russia? That's all in the past. produce modern good products. If we're talking about manufacturing, in general, the modern economy is 75% services. So Ukraine will no longer be an industrial country. It should be a completely different type of modern economy. And the world is changing. Neither the European Union nor Russia. We need to be, that's what I'm calling for. Focus on ourselves and do what's convenient for us. As for Trump giving Ukraine away to Russia as his own domain, just to make a deal, that won't happen either. Because there are many other ways, including for Putin, like a federal system, to put an end to these issues once and for all, the ones he thinks are important. So, it's not going to be as simple as, yeah, here, take this, just that won't happen, 100%, 100%.
There's another aspect I'd like to discuss with you. Is America really that beneficial for Russia right now? It's clear that from Russia we hear, well, what they show us, what Russians say, what some Russian experts who seem to be close to the authorities say. For example, General Gurulev, who is a frequent guest on various platforms, official Kremlin ones, says that in Alaska, I'm constantly being corrected in the chat. Yes, guys, I say in Alaska, because Alaska is a state, so you can say it that way. If you say on Alaska, then yes, look, well, it's the same here, like in Ukraine, you know.
Yes.
Now, Alaska is the same type of territory.
Yes.
So he says that the special military operation will end after, well, Alaska, after the Trump-Putin summit. But what's notable is that today, for some reason, Roskomnadzor has banned making calls on WhatsApp and Telegram. They did it, well, in a limited, partial way. Some people can use it, some can't right now. But it's a pretty serious step.
Yes.
It's very serious. Well, yes, there are scammers, different enemies, various terrorist cells. This is supposed to be for security. But it's being done. Whether it will work out or not, we'll see a bit later. But today it was launched and announced. This is evident. This could actually indicate, on the contrary, confrontation, don't you think? And the strengthening of, well, militant voices and war itself. Because if, let's say, you're about to have a friendly relationship with America and everything will be fine, then why block things off and isolate yourself like this?
Well, because any dictator in reality is weak. I don't know how you can justify it under any pretext, like terrorism or some kind of cells. See, America is also a target for terrorists, for everyone, but nothing is banned here, just like in many decent countries around the world. This is just another act of dictatorship. And I think Zelensky would really like to do something like this. Putin continues the isolation, continues to tighten control over the citizens. Because maybe this is a way out of the war, and they are afraid of something, their special services. This will continue. Starting from September, from the 1st of September, if you withdraw more than $1,000 or $700 from an automated telemachine, you have to show where the money came from, why you are withdrawing it. Total control over people. And this will eventually lead to collapse. No matter how much some of your viewers might want this, it's not good in 2025. It's a sign of weakness.
I would also like to mention one more thing here. Well, look, China is the same
Yes.
social rating.
Yes. That is cameras on the streets. That is... They even have their own YouTube there.
YouTube and their own internet.
Yeah.
Apparently, everything is moving toward this segmentation of the world into different zones. Here are the European, Russian, and Chinese ones.
I disagree.
American. And why are they doing this right now in terms of banning calls? Just now, the statistics skyrocketed literally in a few hours. Everyone started, switching to the government messenger. It's there, Mac.
Yeah.
It's called that. I mean, maybe they'll turn it on later, but everyone has to be under control. Everyone has to be in this messenger. A distant second place is Google Meet. Well, for calls. Why are we discussing this story at the end of the main part? Now let's move on to the questions. Because we are Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are on this side of the front and on the other side of the front. They use WhatsApp and Telegram. They call each other no matter what. They try to at least keep some kind of connection between each other. Right now, I mean purely human, you know? Relationships. Even that girl from Zaporizhia who got 15 years for treason, she was talking to her godmother.
Yes.
Who is on the other side. And can you imagine? The prosecutors issued these papers saying, oh, she was passing on some kind of information. Yeah, come on, a 19-year-old girl, what kind of information could she possibly pass on? And her godmother supposedly to the Russian special services. So this kind of blocking, this is just unacceptable. Even in this exit from the war, you can't separate people from people. That's the kind of aspect I'd like to bring to Alaska to its future. What do you think?
Well, any unrest, any dissatisfaction among the people starts with conversations in the kitchen. And of course, as you said yourself, the phrase is under the hat. Thanks to the internal messenger, they'll be able to listen in. Now, artificial intelligence allows this to be processed instantly, to study the mood of the people at its inception and suppress any reactions that are bad for Putin. As for that, there's one thing I don't understand. For example, there's a great, completely secure messenger, Signal, not advertising. There are a couple more like that, really serious ones, that are truly secure and haven't been compromised so far. Why did they give up Telegram but not the others? That's the only thing I don't understand. I do agree this isn't accidental. Putin is preparing for something big, probably confirming that things with Trump are already about 60-70% settled.
Yes. All right, friends, let's move on to your questions. But first, let's sum up the results of the poll. Thank you very much. 12,500 people are watching us. Please like and subscribe. After the war in Ukraine, 8% think things will be better than before the war. 22% think it will be better than during the war. 27% think it will be worse than during the war. And 43%, that's the most understandable option, think it will be worse than before the war. So, basically, there are two leading answers. First and second place are worse than before the war and worse than during the war. Most viewers think this way. It turns out that the war is lost, because victory in war is not so much about conquests and so on, but about people's lives. No one is expecting a victory in this war in Ukraine, not the kind of victory the authorities are telling us about.
Well, I agree. Look, actually, everyone won except Ukraine. Let me put it this way. Poland entered the top 20 strongest economies in the world. For the most part, that's 50% thanks to Ukrainians who emigrated there from Ukraine because of the war. And actually, even before the war, but especially after, everyone made money on weapons and on other things too. Russia has more controlled territories and the people are pumped up. Putin, you're seen as a great conqueror in their view, though not by me. Everyone won except Ukraine. Ukraine is left with a kilometer-long cemetery, 10 million who fled, millions more trapped, fearful and disappointed, not knowing where to go. There's also the risk of aggressively loyal people gaining power. Of course we lost. In that sense, we lost. But as I've always said, and this is almost a slogan, you need to turn weaknesses into strengths, like Putin does, showing your weak sides as strengths. Now maybe our patience should finally run out. It can't go on this way. We're still a big country with many people. Let's live differently and change everything.
Let's move on to the questions. Blitz mode, let's ask a few questions, the YouTube community, and please write in the live chat. We're live. Well, we're also monitoring things in parallel, so...
Statements?
Statements. And basically, so Mert says they briefly talked about security guarantees. We know that Ukraine needs security guarantees. So when I spoke, I said that we will continue to support the armed forces of Ukraine. What these guarantees will look like was not the topic of today's conversation. What will the security guarantee look like? But this will need to be discussed as soon as the issue of peace arises. In short, Trump sent them away with these security guarantees. That's my conclusion, and I don't think it's a reckless one.
I think that's what it looked like, yes.
Well, because they're just beating around the bush with this. Honestly, it was a strange briefing and strange behavior and a strange statement.
This highlights the event's urgency and their confusion. They didn't know what to do, so they decided to have a video call with Trump on the 13th before the 15th. That's all.
All right, questions. Let's go. Alexandra Haas, hello. Question, Dennis, you have repeatedly spoken about democracy in the United States, but how do you explain the fact that against this backdrop of democracy, we see, and let's go. Here, there's the issue of the effectiveness of democracy regarding Epstein's lists. The recent protests in the United States didn't lead to any results. Corruption at state and federal levels, major social inequality, millions living in trailers, interference in other countries' affairs, frequent military interventions, dozens of invasions in 30 years, and more deaths from American police than anywhere else. How do these facts fit with your claim that the United States is a democracy, while other countries are bad, stupid, undemocratic slaves? How do you personally reconcile these contradictions in your worldview?
First of all, not all other countries, but people often compare Russia to the United States. If someone wants to compare Russia to the United States, and the woman is clearly from Russia, she will look at the gross domestic product per capita of Russia and the United States. And if they want to use as an example other countries like the United States, or what they think are resource-based countries, or those that used to be resource-based, for example, the United Arab Emirates, they need to compare Saudi Arabia to their own standard of living. Russia could live 10 times better. They just don't understand that. And then there's a set of dogmas and utter nonsense. Regarding the Epstein list, they take some isolated case, one in decades, while in Russia, it's possible for anyone. You have no rights there at all. You can be put in jail for a message. They don't want to talk about that. As for the police, they kill a lot, 350 million people. What are we even talking about? It's a huge country, so statistically there are more murders. Let's discuss political prisoners, acquittal rates, and other factors. Don't claim I'm anti every country or think only America is perfect. Most European Union countries generally have more rights and freedoms than Russia. Things may be worse now, but the difference is still huge. If you want to believe everything is perfect, that's your choice.
I don't know why you assume that the person writing is from Russia, the girl Alexandra. Well, let it be. So, Pyotr, question. Was the information that Trump and Putin would meet in Alaska at a military base leaked to discourage any attempts by Zelensky to visit the area?
It's impossible. It won't work out that way. I'm saying this now. It was decided last week. Zelensky won't be there. That was decided last week.
Well, here Miroslav is joking. He says, where did the locusts go? Did the alien get scared? Apparently, yes. At least there are plenty of jokes and so much horror about all this.
Yeah.
Agricultural. And all those memes like, let's cook locusts. Or let's sell them. Let all sorts of snakes and all kinds of...
Yeah, I saw that.
Those, the ones who breed pets, they buy them. Tata is asking a question. Dennis, what do you think? Is this already the end of Z's power? Or will they sell the ceasefire agreement to America in exchange for staying in power?
Impossible, out of the question. Many people want personal guarantees, not just security, but personal ones, like staying president. That won't work. I'm telling people to forget it. It's unrealistic.
So, in other words, they won't sell the end of the war just to stay in power?
No, it doesn't work that way.
Consider this. If, hypothetically, peace comes to Ukraine but Zelensky stays in power, how would you feel personally?
I would be glad that so many people would stop dying, but I still wouldn't be able to live there. I left because of Zelensky, not the war.
Good afternoon, Alexander. Denise, I have a question. Wouldn't the harshest punishment for Zelensky be staying in power in post-war Ukraine with limited Western support, minimal financial aid, and growing resentment from Ukrainians who are seeing things more clearly? Thank you in advance for your answer.
If you take everything together and analyze it, I don't see what Zelensky can hold on to while staying in power. It's impossible. It's simply impossible. Zelensky has entered a stage of a very serious political and personal crisis. Essentially, this is the sunset of his career. If we can call his acting career a precursor to his political one. This is the end of everything. The peak of his life is in the past.
No, that's probably more of a rhetorical question from the user. If it's not possible to hold a settlement, wouldn't it be better to save the soldiers' lives and retreat to more advantageous positions? But they stand their ground until the end. giving their lives just so the enemy gets the settlement, not today, but maybe a day later. Is that the right thing to do?
Well, when we're talking about Bakhmut, of course, things like that are wrong. I've spoken out about this openly. But I'm not a military expert. I'm not a military person. Probably each case needs to be considered individually. In general, I'm not ready to answer that. I'm not an expert in this.
Good evening. Edward, do you agree with the internationally confirmed change of Ukraine's borders along the current line of contact and a proportional exchange of the parts of Kharkiv and Sumy regions occupied by Russia for the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions that are currently under Ukraine's control? Thank you.
Ukraine and Western countries will never recognize territories occupied by Putin as Russian. Absolutely certain. The United States won't agree either. I suggest not viewing it that way. Paradoxically, the main negotiation issue won't be territories, but something else.
Live chat. Chioma, Dennis, how would you end this war?
Just as was mentioned on air today, through a territorial compromise and a change in the state's paradigm, with a federal structure, and compromises could involve the return of territories just with a different status as part of Ukraine.
User Professor, hello Alexander. Please ask your guest if it was possible to avoid a full-scale war with Russia from Ukraine's side. If yes, what exactly should Zelensky have done? Thank you in advance.
Of course, it could have been avoided 100% by behaving differently in the Normandy format, just physically acting differently, conducting negotiations differently, doing everything differently, and not giving in to the globalists at some stage.
So here they're discussing, a user writes that in Odessa they said they didn't take loans from the West. It was Kyiv who did. Could this somehow affect the mood? Well, let's say this is more of a question for the future. In general, what should be done about the loans? It's true, the land was sold, the loans, the resources. This is also a very interesting question.
You talk about these myths. What do you mean, sold the land?
Well, all the agricultural land was sold on the open market. It was bought up.
No, that's not true. There's still a huge land bank in Ukraine. People have just heard things. Maybe some part has been sold, but the huge land bank remains. It should be a commodity. Land is a commodity. It all should be privatized. As for debts, the government apparatus and government spending need to be reduced. Don't join the European Union. Reject all these main European Union directives and agreements. The economy needs to be built in a completely different way. I always say, look at what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina. The same thing needs to be done in Ukraine.
Good evening, everyone. What do you think? If Putin returns the left bank, although that's unlikely, what will happen to the people? Revenge and basements from the Ukrainian authorities, especially since on September 10th, everyone will have to get a Russian Federation passport.
By the way, I didn't know about the Russian Federation passport. As for basements or not, again, we don't know how the war will end, what the policy will be, who will stay in power, whether there will be elections or a transitional period, how all of this will work. Zelensky could even put someone in a basement.
Yes, this is a very important point. Zelensky can do that. And I refer everyone to this warrior of light, Malyuk, who gave a big interview yesterday. He talked about so much there. Wow, it's mind-blowing. Regarding September 10th, look, I think that against the backdrop that if there is, let's say, an agreement and some kind of territorial exchange begins, and Trump said there will be something like that, then apparently this date will be postponed again in the Russian Federation, because I think it was originally planned for the spring. First, it was the beginning of the year, then spring. Now it's September 10th. The point is that every Ukrainian who is on the territory of the Russian Federation must register, meaning they have to get either a residence permit. But now this is already kind of an unpopular thing. Well, basically get a passport. I mean...
Oh, you mean Russia itself, not the occupied territory?
Well, on the occupied territories, this also kind of applies, this legislation, that you have to do something, somehow register. So with a Ukrainian passport, they already end.
I see.
And a Ukrainian who is deep inside Russia also has to somehow be legalized. For now, you can come, well, again, after going through filtration, you can come and kind of stay with a Ukrainian passport as long as you want, well, because it's war and because, yeah. But after September 10th, then you already need, well, some documents. This is really a very serious date that worries Ukrainians, relatives who are on both sides. So this question often comes up. Alexander, what literature does your guest recommend reading? Serge Serkov is asking.
Since the beginning of the war, I haven't read a single book. And before that, I mostly read specialized literature, not much fiction. So I'm not ready to recommend anything. The classics, the classics.
So, Trump, doesn't he want to occupy Greenland if necessary by military means? Those are his words. A user is asking.
Well, when Trump actually carries out a military invasion somewhere, then we'll discuss it. But people just want to say something against America and make things up. It's not even interesting to discuss. Let's talk about facts.
No, but where did the claims on Greenland disappear to, Dennis?
They didn't disappear, but did an American soldier set foot on Greenland's territory? He didn't. Were there any bombings? No. So far, it's only Russia attacking everyone.
So, let's finish with this question from a user. Will there be peace in 2026?
Active combat operations will end by spring at the latest. Can this be considered peace? I don't know. If it's peaceful, will they sign a peace deal? Maybe.
What will you personally consider peace?
The signing of a peace agreement, a final one, not a technical memorandum, but a peace agreement.
Yes, Denis Eliseevich was my interlocutor today. Here our opinions do not coincide. I will consider true peace to be when they take the barrels of artillery guns and tie them in a knot, and then everyone will feel an absolutely new reality. And even in this information war with all these political things, even when they start pressuring some people for the Russian language, others for where were you, others for something else, and all this starts to show up, it will still be peace. Because, well, as they say, it's better to have fistfights than to launch drones and, shells and basically destroy cities. Peace will come when they start rebuilding at least something. That's the main message. It's time to build. Enough of fighting.
I agree.
Thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you for the invitation.
Take care, friends. Wishing you kindness and light. Subscribe. See you soon.